There are crashes you forget, and there are crashes that rewrite the geometry of a sport. Mandalika wasn't just another Sunday. It was the day physics and fate conspired to strip MotoGP to its rawest nerve. In the brutal humidity of Indonesia, where the tarmac glows like molten glass, one breaking error shattered a season engineered to perfection. 31.6 GS. That's what the sensors recorded when Marco Bezzecchi's Aprilia collided with the rear of Marc Márquez's Ducati, an impact so violent it silenced the paddock before the echo faded. The reigning nine-time world champion, still glowing from Motegi's coronation, was left clutching the same shoulder that nearly ended his career. The telemetry told one story: too late, too deep, too desperate. But the eyes of Luigi Dall'Igna told another: betrayal, rage, disbelief. The man who built Ducati's dynasty, who transformed precision into prophecy, watched his masterpiece crumble into gravel and smoke. It wasn't racing, he muttered. It was negligence at 300 kilometers an hour. Around him, data streamed in like grief translated into numbers. Brake pressure spikes, lean angles lost, heartbeats converted into chaos. Bezzecchi walked away without a scratch. His pole position turned into infamy, his name now whispered with the weight of regret. The stewards called it a racing incident. The world called it a scandal. Fans erupted, algorithms exploded, and the red walls of Ducati's garage became a cathedral of silence. Beneath the professionalism, a cold fury settled, a promise that this wound would not heal quietly. Because what happened at Mandalika was more than a crash, it was a fault line splitting MotoGP's soul, a reminder that in the pursuit of perfection, one reckless move could turn engineering into tragedy, champions into casualties, and gods of speed into men made of bone and consequence. And as the echoes of that collision faded into the sweltering Mandalika air, the story truly began, the moment physics ended and fate took the handlebars. The air at Mandalika was thick with humidity and prophecy, a charged silence before the storm that every mechanic could feel vibrating through the carbon fiber fairings. The red lights blinked out and the grid exploded, engines howling like caged tempests breaking free. Marc Márquez, fresh from conquering his 9th world title only 7 days earlier in Motegi, leaned into turn 1 with the precision of a surgeon. His Desmosed-side GP25 balanced on that razor-thin line between control and chaos. But behind him, Marco Bezzecchi's Aprilia RSGP launched late, the clutch slipping by 0.02 of a second, an invisible error that would soon become history's scar. The Italian braked 38 meters later than recommended by Brembo telemetry, his front tire whispering surrender before it screamed. "Not here, Marco, not now," murmured Márquez inside his helmet, feeling the faint shadow of danger approaching like static before lightning. The impact came not as a sound, but as a shudder that tore the rhythm of the race apart, a dull metallic gasp followed by the sick percussion of carbon against asphalt. In that instant, time folded. He was back in Jerez 2020, back in the agony of bone-meeting fate. "I knew it," he would later whisper, voice trembling with disbelief and déjà vu. The Ducati spun twice before sliding into the gravel, sparks painting a dying constellation across the Indonesian dusk. Dust filled his visor, tasting of salt and regret. He tried to rise, but the right arm disobeyed, hanging like a broken metronome that could no longer keep tempo with his heartbeat. Inside, his mind screamed one thought: not again, not the same shoulder. Marshals ran, orange vests slicing through the haze, while Bezzecchi's Aprilia lay silent, its radiator bleeding steam into the humid air. A data engineer watching for the pit muttered, 31.6 GS on impact, unreal. The phrase echoed through the paddock like a funeral statistic. Márquez felt the gravel beneath him shifting, each grain a reminder that glory in MotoGP weighs less than dust when physics intervenes. He looked toward the grandstand. The crowd had fallen mute, thousands of breaths caught between disbelief and devotion. "He's moving," someone shouted, and hope flickered like a pit lane spark plug reigniting. Yet inside the champion, something colder settled, a knowledge older than courage, that perfection in this sport is borrowed time. The camera zoomed close, catching the faint tremor of pain crossing his face as medics approached, and in that single frame the season changed forever. For Ducati, celebration transformed into silence. For MotoGP, Mandalika became a wound carved into memory. The climax arrived not with noise but with absence, and as the helicopter lifted off, carrying the champion away, the track itself seemed to exhale a single truth: even gods of speed fall to gravity's indifferent hand. Luigi Dall'Igna stood in the Ducati garage like a storm trapped inside glass, his silence louder than any crash. The monitors flickered with replays of Márquez tumbling through the gravel, each frame another spark feeding the fire building behind his eyes. Engineers avoided his gaze, knowing that the calmest man in MotoGP had reached the edge of his composure. How could this happen? He muttered, voice cracked between disbelief and fury, as if the question itself could rewind time. His hand trembled slightly, resting on a telemetry screen that displayed the brutal spike of 31.6 GS, the mechanical signature of disaster. The headset hit the floor with a hollow echo, and for a heartbeat the whole garage froze. He had designed this machine to be poetry written in titanium and data, not an instrument of tragedy. A small inner voice whispered, "You gave him perfection, but perfection can't save him from chaos." Bezzecchi's name flashed across the timing screen, a cruel reminder that sometimes betrayal doesn't come in words but in milliseconds. Dall'Igna's mind ran faster than any lap, recalculating damage, media fallout, championship optics. The heat of Lombok pressed against his skin like punishment, thick and merciless. A mechanic dared to speak. "Luigi, calm down. It was just a racing incident." His reply was ice. Racing incident? He destroyed the man who defines this era. The metaphor hung heavy. To him, Márquez wasn't merely a rider, but the heart that pumped Ducati's renaissance. He turned toward the back of the box where the spare fairing glowed red under artificial light and thought how fragile dominance looks when stripped of motion. The telemetry printer spat endless paper, numbers bleeding into one another like the pulse of a dying patient. Reporters waited outside, sensing history being rewritten through clenched jaws and broken silence. "They'll call it bad luck," he said, "but luck has nothing to do with recklessness." Every word was an autopsy on the moment, dissecting responsibility, pride, and helplessness. He looked up at the screen one last time, Márquez being lifted onto the stretcher, helmet still on, dignity intact, and exhaled a breath that felt heavier than the whole season. Inside that breath lived every sleepless night spent crafting a machine capable of rewriting destiny. And in that stillness, Luigi Dall'Igna realized that victory and ruin share the same heartbeat, and today, Mandalika made them indistinguishable. Marco Bezzecchi sat in the Aprilia box, helmet still on, visor down, as if hiding from the reflection of his own mistake. The data screen in front of him replayed the telemetry trace, an impossible braking pattern, 38 meters deeper than the algorithm predicted any sane rider would attempt. He had started from pole, but his launch had been catastrophic, his clutch map misaligned by half a millisecond, enough to drown a dream before the first corner. The desperation that followed was not born of ambition, but of panic disguised as courage. "I saw the gap," he said later, "and then it disappeared." His voice was thin, almost childlike, a man cornered by consequences he didn't intend. "Why did I go for it?" He asked himself behind closed eyelids, the question looping like static through his mind. The crash itself had the violence of inevitability, a meeting of momentum and misjudgment that physics had already written long before the tires touched. Márquez's shoulder, visibly displaced as he tried to rise, became the symbol of that miscalculation. The stewards reviewed the footage for precisely 4 minutes and 23 seconds before declaring it a racing incident. No penalty. No accountability. In the paddock, whispers grew like wildfire, disguised as gossip. "You know, he was once Ducati's protege," someone murmured near the espresso machine, the kind of sentence that carries both history and poison. Bezzecchi had left Borgo Panigale 2 years earlier after contract tensions and quiet resentment, replaced by the man now lying broken in Mandalika's gravel. The irony was unbearable. He had struck the ghost of his own lost opportunity. Aprilia engineers defended him with statistics, arguing that aerodynamic wake and reduced downforce caused instability at that speed, but excuses have no traction on scorched asphalt. Reporters called it impatience. Insiders called it vengeance wrapped in denial. A tiny adjustment in traction control, just 2% softer, might have saved them both. The detail only visible in the black box now stores evidence. "He didn't mean it," said one mechanic, but intent doesn't change the outcome. The sentence lingered like smoke above a paddock split between sympathy and suspicion. And when Bezzecchi finally removed his helmet, eyes hollow under the fluorescent lights, he saw on every face the same unspoken verdict. Sometimes, the line between error and betrayal is thinner than the width of a front tire, and once crossed, it never disappears. The jet engines hummed like a requiem as Marc Márquez sat by the window, his right arm locked in a carbon fiber brace that felt heavier than any trophy. The cabin lights flickered soft gold over his bandaged shoulder, illuminating the quiet collapse of a perfect season. He was supposed to be parading triumph, not pain, leading Ducati's red procession through Australia, Thailand, and Malaysia in a victory lap written in speed and certainty. Now he counted flight hours instead of laps, watching clouds drift like indifferent spectators. "We had the plan, the numbers, the momentum," Dall'Igna whispered to an engineer before takeoff, "and now all we have is silence." Inside the Ducati garage back in Mandalika, the smell of burnt clutch and disinfectant still hung in the air, a cruel perfume of effort undone. How can a bone ruin a dynasty? Márquez thought, his inner voice trembling with disbelief and irony. Doctors in Madrid awaited him with CT scans and conflicting strategies, surgery with titanium fixation or a conservative path risking loss of muscle memory. The decision, as in racing, will be made in milliseconds, but felt like eternity. A single fracture had detonated months of engineering harmony, shattering Dall'Igna's orchestration like a symphony cut mid-crescendo. Telemetry analysts recalculated simulation data, projecting time loss curves for each race he'd miss, their screens bleeding decimals instead of hope. "If he skips Australia, we lose 52 manufacturer points minimum," someone murmured, a statement colder than mathematics should be. The Desmosedici GP25, stripped and waiting in Bologna's factory, looked like a monument to unfinished glory. Journalists circled like moths drawn to fluorescent grief, spinning headlines that tasted of blame and betrayal. Ducati's celebration banners, already printed, lay rolled in silence, red fabric mourning a story that would never be told. An aerodynamicist noticed that even the pit sensors had recorded the vibration of the crash echoing through the structure, a ghost in data form. Dall'Igna replayed the race again and again, searching for logic where only chaos lived. The metaphor that came to him was cruelly fitting. Perfection is a cathedral built from fragile bolts. When he finally turned off the monitor, his reflection stared back, exhausted, proud, defeated. He knew that leadership meant enduring the unbearable weight of contingency. And as night fell over Lombok, he murmured, "We built a masterpiece and fate red flagged it." In that single sentence, Ducati's dream collapsed into myth. The crash was over, but the war of words had only begun, spreading faster than any race start across the digital paddock of the internet. Within minutes, hashtags pulsed like open wounds. Hashtag justice for Marc versus hashtag let them race. Each post a spark in a storm of outrage. Screens glowed in bedrooms, cafes, and press rooms from Bologna to Buenos Aires. The echo of Mandalika now translated into pixels and fury. Márquez's fans demanded retribution, flooding MotoGP's official page with 1,000 furious emojis that felt like digital fists. Bezzecchi's defenders countered with equal passion, chanting the old racer's creed, "It's just racing." Yet nothing about it felt just, and nothing about it felt like racing. If Márquez had done that, tweeted an Italian journalist, they'd be calling for a lifetime ban. The sentence spread like spilled fuel, igniting commentary panels and dividing experts who once shared the same coffee table in the press lounge. "How do we end up here?" thought Dall'Igna, scrolling through the endless debate, watching his sport turn into theater. MotoGP, always proud of its brotherhood, now looked like a family tearing itself apart over loyalty and bias. Analysts brought out statistics from previous seasons, lap 1 penalties, dangerous overtakes, steward inconsistencies, numbers that revealed a quiet pattern of favoritism. One technical report even noted how the race direction algorithm flagged Bezzecchi's braking input as beyond safe margin, yet chose not to act. "Consistency is the first casualty of politics," murmured a veteran commentator, half in jest, half in despair. The stewards released a 2-sentence statement citing lack of intent, and the paddock erupted once more. Riders avoided microphones, aware that one careless word could ignite another inferno. In Ducati's garage, silence was their protest. In Aprilia's, defiance their shield. Fans interpreted both as guilt. The hypocrisy was suffocating, rules bent by nationality, influence, and narrative convenience. The metaphor that emerged online was brutal. MotoGP had become a cathedral where the confession booth was always locked. Even neutral observers felt the sport trembling under the weight of its own contradictions. And when the dust of opinion finally began to settle, one truth lingered beneath the noise. Justice in racing is often decided not by rules or replays, but by the volume of the crowd that screams the loudest. The Mandalika crash didn't end with a checkered flag. It rewired the emotional circuitry of MotoGP itself. Ducati's empire, built on precision and invincibility, now vibrated with tension and self-doubt. Behind every analytical meeting, a shadow lingered, the ghost of one reckless moment that rewrote their entire narrative. Bezzecchi's name, once spoken with admiration, became shorthand for calamity, a reminder that a fraction of misjudgment can erase years of glory. His reputation fell faster than his lap times ever had, collapsing under the weight of public fury. "He's gone from prodigy to pariah," murmured a team insider, half pity, half venom. "What have I done to my own future?" Bezzecchi wondered, watching replays on a muted monitor that reflected only his regret. Aprilia stood defiant, claiming racing's inherent risk as justification, while Ducati prepared dossiers, telemetry data, and quiet vengeance in PowerPoint form. The rivalry, once merely competitive, now had the chill of personal vendetta. Engineers compared aero maps like forensic detectives, searching for evidence of recklessness encoded in throttle traces. Even hospitality tents buzzed with distrust, espresso cups trembling with whispered conspiracies. Dall'Igna, ever the tactician, began drafting proposals for rule reform, demanding automatic penalties for unsafe entries exceeding G-force thresholds. "We need a system that respects physics as much as passion," he said, voice controlled but eyes ablaze. His engineers nodded, sensing the transformation of grief into policy. The metaphor he carried privately was haunting. The championship had become a glass bridge, transparent, magnificent, and always one crack away from collapse. Media outlets portrayed the drama as a civil war of ideologies, safety versus spectacle, control versus chaos. Sponsorship executives fretted over optics, while mechanics polished machines like knights tending to wounded armor. The paddock atmosphere thickened into a theater of smiles hiding storms, professionalism masking fury. In briefings, riders exchanged glances colder than carbon brakes on the formation lap. Trust, that invisible fuel of the sport, had leaked everywhere. And as night settled over Bologna, Dall'Igna stood alone beside the dormant Desmosedici, whispering a vow to the machine and the man it had betrayed. The next time Ducati rises, it will rise unbreakable or not at all. The Mandalika circuit glimmered under a punishing Indonesian sun, its asphalt shimmering like a mirage built to test destiny itself. For Marc Márquez, this track had always felt haunted, a looped echo of pain repeating year after year in the same cursed corner. In 2022, it nearly ended him. In 2025, it came back to finish the sentence. The crash replayed endlessly across screens. Yet for him, the moment was not sound but sensation, a violent silence between heartbeat and impact. His right collarbone, freshly fractured, pulsed with a cruel memory of surgeries past. "He's done it before," Dall'Igna told reporters, voice brittle beneath professionalism. "He'll do it again. But this one hurts." The phrase carried more truth than strategy, because even champions can feel the weight of repetition breaking through bravado. "Why always me, and why always here?" Márquez thought, staring at the medical bandage that turned his arm into a reluctant relic. Doctors spoke in cautious tones. Titanium plate, 5 screws, estimated recovery, 6 weeks if fortune dared to cooperate. Technical jargon couldn't disguise the emotional arithmetic of time lost. His body, mapped with scars like constellations of endurance, was once more rewritten by gravity's hand. In the paddock, whispers softened into prayers. Rival crews paused mid-packing to watch the broadcast of his evacuation. A mechanic from Gresini muttered, "He rides closer to the edge than the sensors can measure." The telemetry confirmed it. Lean angle of 63.4 degrees before impact, a fraction beyond stability's promise. Yet numbers could not quantify what kept him going. Fans flooded social media with digital devotion, writing Forza Marc beneath images of him smiling through pain. Each message was a candle flickering against inevitability. He read them silently from the hospital bed, the white room smelling faintly of antiseptic and destiny. He thought of Motegi, of the trophy he'd held with trembling hands just days earlier, and how fragile triumph feels when followed by anesthesia. The metaphor he carried into the dark was simple. Life at 300 kilometers per hour is a coin flipped by the wind. Outside, Dall'Igna's voice broke as he told the press, "Courage doesn't heal bones, but it keeps them from breaking twice." And in that moment, the myth of Márquez became something more human, less about speed, more about survival, and forever bound to the corner that refuses to forget his name. Long after the engines cooled, Mandalika still hummed with the ghost frequency of what happened there. The circuit, carved between sea and jungle, stood like a monument to consequence, shimmering under a sun too bright for morning. Reporters called it a tragedy of velocity, but those who were present knew it was something quieter, heavier, more permanent. Ducati's garage remained half-lit, the smell of burnt rubber clinging to the floor like memory refusing to fade. The empty seat of the Desmosedici GP25 became an altar, one piece of carbon fiber, now sacred by absence. That corner will never look the same again, whisper mechanic, voice caught between reverence and fatigue. So this is what history feels like when it hurts, thought Dall'Igna, staring at the telemetry frozen on the last lap that never finished. Bezzecchi avoided the media zone, walking past the flashing cameras with the expression of a man aging by the minute. His name, once celebrated, now carried the weight of a cautionary tale told in every paddock cafe. The steward's decision still echoed like an unresolved chord, vibrating through conversations that refused to die. Fans continued to argue online. Their loyalty turned into liturgy, their grief into data traffic. Sponsors rewrote slogans. Broadcasters replayed slow-motion replays until even silence felt rehearsed. The human cost, however, resisted scripting. Márquez, recovering in Madrid, followed the coverage from his hospital bed, hearing every headline like a pulse in the distance. Dark days build bright legacies, he murmured to his physiotherapist, half promise, half prophecy. Technical analysts noted that the new crash sensors had captured 31.6 GS before cutoff, information destined to rewrite safety protocols. Yet numbers could not quantify the ache that spread through the sport like an invisible bruise. The metaphor that survived the weekend was cruelly apt. Mandalika had become MotoGP's mirror, reflecting both brilliance and fragility in the same frame. When night finally swallowed the paddock, the track lights flickered like candles at a vigil. Mechanics zipped the flight crates, but no one dared touch the champion's name etched on the seat. And as the cargo doors closed, the air itself seemed to whisper a single, unrepeatable truth, that in 2025, beneath the Indonesian sky, glory learned the price of being mortal.